The following program is a production of the Fairfax Network, Fairfax County Public Schools.
Biographies are detailed descriptions of a person's life. They're based on facts and research. If you're in school, perhaps you've read a biography of a world leader, athlete, scientist, artist. Successful biographies aren't just facts. Successful biographies reveal something of a person's heart. Joining me today is Marc Tyler Nobleman. He's the author of 2 biographies for children. These picture books are Boys of Steel, the creators of Superman, and Bill the Boy Wonder, the secret co-creator of Batman. Marc, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I am really looking forward to speaking with you about this topic today. Can we agree that Superman and Batman are probably the most famous comic book characters of all time?
I think they may be 2 of the most famous fictional characters of all time, frankly.
Absolutely.
So I do agree.
How are they the same? How are they different?
Well, they're the same in that they're both superheroes with secret identities and this dedication to doing good. They're different in the dichotomy. Superman is day, he's a Boy Scout, he's good for good's sake, and Batman is darker, he's scarred, he's doing what he's doing because he had a tragedy in his life that he witnessed. So there's a difference in their motivations.
What do you think superheroes represent?
Well, superheroes are part of the fictional canon. They represent one thing to one person and something to somebody else, something else to somebody else. For me, I don't know why I latched onto them. I just saw Superman the movie as a 6-year-old in 1978, and it spoke to me. It was fantasy, but not completely outlandish. I wasn't into hardcore science fiction, but it was grounded. He seemed human, even though he was not, and I liked that construct.
Well, following along those lines, what would you compare comic superheroes, comic characters to? Can they be compared to perhaps the superhero element of them, perhaps to characters today or from long ago?
Oh, and you mean from real life?
Or fictionalized.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, there have been superheroes before the term was used. If you want to apply some hindsight, I mean, Tarzan, the Scarlet Pimpernel. I mean, even Hercules and Samson were what might today be called the superhero.
Back in the days of mythology,
yeah,
sure.
Larger-than-life characters.
Tell us about the Boys of Steel. Who are they?
The Boys of Steel, that's a term I made up, but that's Jerry Siegel and Joe Schuster. Jerry was the original writer of Superman. Joe is his best friend and partner. Artistically, he was the artist of Superman. And these were guys that created Superman in the darkest days of the Great Depression in Cleveland, Ohio. They were young guys at the
So
time.
this was a time where financially people were needy. What else did people need? Why do you think it was a success and the timing was right for those stories?
A lot of people give Superman's popularity, they ascribe it to the exact time that he came out. He came out on the cusp of the Great Depression and World War II. So it was a time where we were coming out of great bleakness and going into something that was also difficult and traumatic, but where people needed hope. And it was a lot of families sending their sons and kids off into the unknown, and Superman was, what I say in the book is that he was a hero that they knew would always come home. Not to diminish the role of a real service person, of course that's absolutely selfless work, but Superman was something that people could pin their hopes on.
And people needed that at that time. Why did you refer to the Boys of Steel as the unsung heroes?
Well, you know, it's funny that you say, when you were asking about superheroes before,
Right.
I don't actually call Jerry and Joe heroes. I think that's a very common thing that happens when you're writing about these guys. They did a great thing, they have a great accomplishment. They weren't heroic in the sense that I would call someone who serves in the military or someone who makes the news for saving pulling someone out of a burning building.
Right.
The term can be diluted the more we use it for everyday people, but they did do something that was pioneering, and they created a whole industry, frankly. But I don't go so far as to call them heroes. They are unsung, though. They spent 35 years watching Superman make money for a lot of other people besides themselves. And it was only toward the end of their lives that they got their names restored to the character and got some compensation for their character.
Frankly, until I read the book, I had never heard of either of these gentlemen.
Yeah.
And so they're little known before you wrote this book. So how do you begin the research process about someone or people who we don't know a lot about?
Well, they're not household names,
Right.
although I'm hoping that through my book and other people's work they will become that. But they're not completely unknown. They do have a lot of name recognition in the comics and among comics fans. So for them, they're both they're both deceased, so I couldn't speak with them. But I did speak with people who knew them, and I looked at every published interview that I could find that they gave in their lifetime. That was my starting point.
Why did you choose them to begin with?
Well,
What sparked you?
Well, I've been a Superman fan since
Okay.
I was tiny, and that was the real core of this. But then, as a writer, when I saw that no one had ever done this, no one had ever written a book about the guys who created basically not just Superman, but the whole concept of a modern superhero, it just seemed like a huge gap between expectation and reality. And it also, just from a marketing perspective, most people like Superman. They might not be passionate, but no one has anything against him. It just seemed like a good idea to do that, fill a gap on the shelf, and also show kids that biographies are not only about people that you come across in the textbook. It's not just the bold-faced names. Those are all wonderful people. We need to learn about them, but there are other people that haven't come up yet that you also should know about.
Great things are accomplished all the time. It's looking into it and finding those stories.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Well, if you would like to learn more about the writing process and how biographies are created, reach us via phone at 1-800-231-6359 or Skype us today at Meet the Author. But first, let's visit a comic outpost at the library of Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. VCU has one of the largest collections of comics and graphic novels in the world. Let's take a look.
It's a real page-turner! School librarians take on double duty to support classroom instruction and boost independent reading among youngsters. Holy concept! It's reading for fun! Read me! Over here! I'm the one! Pick me, please! Yoo-hoo! Choices galore! But what kids won't find in most elementary school libraries, and for a lot of good reasons, are traditional comic books. If kids want to read about superheroes, they'll have to spend their own allowance, or go to college. That's right, college! This is the Comic Arts Collection at Virginia Commonwealth University. Over 100,000 items make their home at VCU, so students and college professors can study the impact of comic book design and meaning. Cindy Jackson can explain, but she's busy right now. Meanwhile, consider comics as a barometer. Comics show how society and culture change over time. The role of an archivist is to maintain a collection of books, artifacts, specimens, or related media, which have long-term value within a specific field of interest. An archivist preserves, documents, circulates, and expands a collection. There are databases to maintain, papers to write, and classes to teach.
There are comics that are very literary, and there are comics that are just fun to read. And comics are for all ages, all genders, all races, all nationalities, all educational levels. Comics are the perfect reading material.
Oh, look over here! Oh, here! Hey, get me out of this box!
Out of the box, Cindy Jackson says comic books are designed to be
You
interactive.
have to make a decision about what goes on between the frames to get to the next one. And this is interesting because it has not only the typical comic book form, which you see from panel to panel to panel where you have to follow the story, then you have single panel comics, which would be one comic with a blurb.
The collection at VCU continues to grow. Comics can be considered naughty and nice, but they also happen to influence graphic novels, book art, video games, and us. The fact remains, comics are no laughing matter, even if they are fun.
From the video, we can see that comic books and graphic novels are not only archived, but they're studied by scholars, which might be surprising to some people that are watching. Would Siegel and Schuster, would they be surprised? What do you think they would be thinking or feeling if they knew that they were being studied by scholars?
I love that question. Well, they did live until the 1990s, so they lived long enough to see comic books become validated by the mainstream and by culture. They probably feel that they should be studied, and I agree with them. They should be. I think that they might be surprised at how deeply it's penetrated actually, but I think they would feel that it would be appropriate that people know about their contribution.
Yeah, it's so deeply embedded in our culture now. Yeah. We're going to stop here for a moment because we have a student standing by with a question via Skype.
Oh, great.
He is from Greenbriar East Elementary School. I believe we have Ian. And hi, Ian. What is your question today for Mark?
First of all, I just want to say that the way that you combined your words and pictures was extremely captivating to me.
Thank you, Ian. That's nice of you to say.
Researching the book.
His question was, did you encounter any obstacles with your research?
Oh, that's a great question, Ian. I did. One of them in particular was the simple fact that I don't own Superman. He's owned by a big company called DC Comics. So I can write a book about Superman, so could you. And I can show a few pictures of Superman on the inside of my book, but I can't show him a lot, and I can't put him on the cover. That's off limits. So that's a dilemma, how to write a book about Superman without putting Superman on the cover. And this was the solution that we came up with. The artist's name is Ross McDonald, and we showed Superman, but without any detail. He's so iconic that you can recognize who he is without any detail at all, just the barest hint of a cape and that very strong stance. So that's one way that we got around an obstacle. We showed him without showing him.
Thanks for the question, Ian.
Thank you.
That probably would be a little frustrating too, having to navigate around all of the rules and the laws that are govening copyrights.
That is tricky
with the characters.
When you're working with licensed characters like this. We just have to go by fair use and be as careful as possible.
I'm sure. Yeah. We have another question via Skype. This is from Mark. He's also from Greenbriar East. Hi, Mark. What's your question?
Hi. First of all, I'd like to say that I like the way you started the book. It was really amazing.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome. My first question is, when you began your research about the creators of Superman, what was the biggest surprise you learned?
That's a great question. One of the biggest surprises was that in 70 years of talking about Superman, everybody talked only about Jerry's house. Jerry was the writer. Nobody ever talked about whatever happened to Joe's house in Cleveland, Ohio. And Superman was half created in Jerry's house and half created in Joe's house. So I put it upon myself to find out what happened to Joe's house, which I found out was actually a small apartment building, why it's not there anymore, and what it even looked like. So I spent some time in Cleveland looking for this information. And it's a longer story than I can get into now, but it was a good story. And I did find photos, and I found out what happened to the house.
Did you consult with libraries, halls of records? Where did you go
Every
to even
possible archival body in Cleveland, starting with the Historical Society, then the Cleveland State University Archives, and finally where I found the answer was in the public library.
Yeah, we're always looking for those primary documents when we're doing our research.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
And this was completely untouched before.
How about that? We have a third question. This is from Cameron. Hi, Cameron, and what is your question today?
Hi. Have there been other careers that you thought about before becoming an author?
Thanks for the question, Cameron. I wanted to be a cartoonist since I was quite young, but there was a period where I thought I wanted to be an astronaut. Cartooning is just a little bit more convenient, so I went with that.
That's there's so many options out there. Cameron, all the students that we've spoken to from Greenbriar East, hang in there because we're going to be visiting back with you in just a few minutes while I have some more questions for Mark, okay? So stay put. All right. Describe Bill Finger for us. Who was he, and why did you choose to write about him in Bill the Boy Wonder?
Bill Finger is the uncredited co-creator and original writer of Batman, but he's much more than that. Even though he was the writer, he also designed the costume, which is iconic now. He wrote not only the first Batman story, but the first Robin, Joker, Catwoman, Penguin stories. He named Gotham City. He named Bruce Wayne. He created the Batmotif, naming things like the Batmobile and the Batcave. So he was really the main architect of Batman, but in his 25 years of writing Batman comic books, his name appeared in a comic as the co-creator or as the original writer exactly 0 times. And that's why I wanted to write about him, because it's a grave injustice about a character that is all about justice.
One of those unsung heroes we've been talking about. What was his writing process like? Did he have to churn out a new adventure about this character on a weekly basis?
Probably more than one on a weekly basis. I don't know exactly, but he wrote about at least 1,500 stories in his 25-year career. And he was a meticulous writer. He was an artist's dream, because he wouldn't just give them a script. He would give them visuals. He would rip out pages of magazines and say, I'm imagining a scene like this, which artists adored because it gave them a helping hand. He was also known for being late with his work because he was so meticulous. But it was a double-edged sword. He was so good that the editors forgave him being late because what he turned in was just excellent work.
Is it true that he used his 10-year-old for inspiration and for validation that this is a good idea and bounce ideas off of his child?
Yeah, he had one child, a son named Fred, and Fred was involved with the process when he was old enough. Bill would share scripts with him and get a young person's insight, and I believe at times would make tweaks because of that.
How about that? When I was a third grade teacher, I used to do the same thing with my third grade daughter. Lots of inspiration from the students. Tell us about some of Bill's work. Did he get writer's block?
I doubt he did, because he was so prolific, and if he ever got it, it couldn't have lasted very long. But he was really a very hands-on writer. He would, like I said, he would use a lot of reference. He would make trips to the American Museum of Natural History in New York City with his son. So it was a field trip for his son, but it was a business trip for him as well, because he was getting ideas for stories. So he was a very, hands-on, and he put a lot of work into each story.
And through that work, what are some of the contributions he was able to make?
Well, I named all the big ones already, the costume and the bat motif and all the supporting characters.
And you brought some books along with you, so maybe you can share some images of those things with us.
Sure. I should say that I think probably, this is all subjective, but probably his most enduring contribution was giving Batman a real-life reason to do what he's doing. Superman just did good because it was the right thing to do, but Batman had a tragedy in his childhood, and that's what provoked him, or inspired him, or whatever the term, motivated him to do this crazy thing. And that was Bill. Bill applied that to a comic book superhero. That had never been done before. That was very novelistic. So Bill was quite ahead of the time doing that. This is fun to talk about. This is what Batman would have looked like if Bill was not involved. There's another guy that I haven't named yet. His name was Bob Kane. He was a cartoonist. He was the one who supposedly came up with the idea for a character called Batman, but after that, Bill pretty much took the baton and did everything. So this was Bob's design. This is a recreation of it based on descriptions. And most people that see this say, thank God Bill was involved.
That is not Batman, not the one we know.
No. If you want to hear another quick one, I can show you.
Absolutely, please do.
Another one of Bill's hallmarks and trademarks was he was known for writing scripts with giant props. So he would have Batman and Robin fighting criminals on a giant telescope, or a giant typewriter, or in this case, a giant toaster. This is an authentic detail from, this is our version of it, but this actually took place in a Batman story. So this was completely bizarre and quirky, and people loved it. It was just so off the wall.
That is very unusual.
Yeah.
Do you have any others that you'd like to share with us? I see a couple more stickies there. So
we do have one more sticky, but that one I think that's coming up.
Okay,
if
we'll
I
hang on to that thought for just a minute. All right, well, we do have some more students that are waiting with Skype questions, so let's go to Safa. Safa, what is your question today, please?
Hi. Before I start with my question, I would like to say how Mark writes with words that makes you feel like you're inside the book and makes it interesting and easy to understand.
You guys are all so nice. Thank you very much.
I agree with you on that, Safa. What's your question? Okay,
You got your book published.
Can you repeat that, Safa? We only heard the last part of your question.
How long did it take from when you first got your story idea till you got your book published?
That's a great question, Safa. It takes longer than most people think, and less time, and more time than it should, frankly. With Boys of Steel, I wrote it in 2004. I sold the manuscript in 2005, and the book came out in 2008, which is longer than usual, frankly. And with Bill the Boy Wonder, I wrote it, the first draft was in 2007. I sold it in 2010, and it came out this summer. So there's no one tract. Typically, it's 1.5 to 2 years from when you sell it to when it is a physical book. But for me, a lot of the time goes even before that, when I'm doing my research and doing my writing. Thanks for the question.
I'm sure the waiting seemed like a very long time for that process.
Yeah, when you say it now, it doesn't seem so long, but in the middle of it, it's a lot longer.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question via Skype, and this is from Becca. She's also from Greenbriar East. Hi, Becca.
Hi.
Hi, Becca.
First of all, let me just say that I really liked how you described everything in pure detail, and I also liked how you used great vocabulary.
Thank you.
On to my question. Why did you choose to write the story about Batman's secret co-creator? Why was it to follow up on your book Boys of Steel, or for another reason?
It was for that reason and more. I felt that Bill Finger deserves a lot more credit than he gets in the mainstream. Comic book people know about him, but the average person growing up doesn't hear his name because they never see it. It's never on a Batman story. It's only Bob Kane's name. So I felt that someone should give him the legacy that he deserves. And other people have done great things about Bill, but no one had ever written a book about him, and certainly not for young people on up. I want people to grow up knowing that when they see Batman created by Bob Kane, whether it's in a comic or a book or a video game or a movie, that that is not the whole truth.
There was a lot of other genius that going into contributing to that character.
Yes.
Yes, it's been great learning about that. We also have another question. Let's go back to Safa for a moment.
Okay.
Hi, Safa.
Hi again.
Hi again. I remember you.
Okay, so my second question is, how has Batman's character changed throughout the years?
That's a good question as well. When Batman debuted, he was dark. He was a figure of the night. He was scary. And then over the next 25 years or so, he began to shift to become more of almost a goofy character. And then that was around the 1960s when it reached its peak. And there was a TV show that you probably have never heard of, but it was a very popular show of the time where it was completely goofy and off the wall. And then after that, Batman was returned to his roots. He became darker again. And his roots are Bill Finger, making him this gritty, intimidating figure. And that's the version of Batman that we still have today, almost 40 years later. So he's had lots of little changes, and those are some of the bigger roller coaster changes.
Okay, thanks, Safa. And you all don't go away. We may be seeing you again here in a few minutes, so hang in there with us. Mark, talk to us about, you brought a scarab with you.
Yes.
Tell us about this. We were talking about this before the show. What a fascinating story.
Yes. Well, I'll show you the book first.
Okay.
There is a scene in the book where Bill is at work, at his desk, writing. And it might be hard to make out, but at the very bottom here, next to the typewriter, which I hope you guys have heard of, it's an old-fashioned computer.
Right here.
Perfect visual. Yeah. Is a little bronze doohickey. You can't tell what it is maybe at first, but it is a scarab, and it's a paperweight. And that could be any detail that was made up for all any reader knows, but it's actually a real authentic detail. I have it right here. This was a scarab paperweight that Bill Finger owned. So it's not valuable. It's not solid gold.
For those who don't know, what is a scarab?
A scarab is a beetle. And in this case, it's an Egyptian beetle. You might be able to see in the back there are some glyphs, some hieroglyphs. And I inherited this from one of Bill's longtime friends, a man named Charles Sinclair, a really old school gentleman, who gave this to me when I was researching the book because he thought it would mean something to me. And I was extremely honored. I refused it at first, but he said, no, I really think that it would mean more to you than anybody else, so please take it. And he said that Bill would type Batman scripts and then take them out of the typewriter and then put this scarab on top of them. So I feel like it was really eerie and haunting in a good way for this to be on my desk when I'm writing about Bill, when I knew that at one point it was on his desk when he was writing Batman.
And he actually used it as a paperweight for his scripts.
Yes.
That's amazing. Thank you.
I'm very honored to have it.
I'm sure you are. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, as we learned earlier in the program, comic books are for everyone. Let's take a look at what students learn when they create their own comic books. And when we return, tips for writers of all ages. Let's take a look.
The point of this class is about doodling. And doodling is where you can feel free to make mistakes and to make them work. And a great deal of the time, I find I learn more from my mistakes than from a perfectly executed drawing. Mistakes are sort of where the heart of creativity is how do you sort of take something that doesn't quite work and make it work. And then I often show a less professional artist like myself working on things that intrigue and interests me, and show the work of it, you know, the craftsmanship, the mistakes that I make, and then how you solve that. So what I was talking about was the foot being reversed here, fixing this mistake here, where I can reverse his face and put it in later. A lot of kids think, oh, well, you're excellent, we really like your drawings, you're perfect, I don't want to draw. But if I can show them my mistakes, I think they get really excited because they're like, well, even he who's really good can make a mistake, and so they get excited to make their own mistakes. I like to sort of jump in and sort of inhabit where they are in their creativity and see what it is they're working on. Yesterday you had the muscles like just straight like this, and today there's almost a three-dimensionality to them.
Yeah, it took a while to get the muscles right.
Yeah.
And the arm right, because there's a lot of eraser marks.
Yeah. No, I can clearly see you're working on that. That you saw a problem and decided to solve it. You weren't satisfied with just this. And so that's, anytime you guys are sitting around saying, oh, this drawing's terrible, you know, all that is your creative ability saying, I can make this better, I just need to mess with it more. Okay, let's take a look. Ooh, a griffin. Right? It's a griffin? I like that you get really into mythical creatures here.
And then there's a second griffin and a griffin elevator.
And a griffivator, because his wings are tired and he doesn't want to fly.
Yeah.
That's a super bus, man. I'd like to travel in style like that. Your imagination can be your best company, you know, your best friend. And that's how you learn.
Clearly, imagination plays such a huge part in writing and drawing and creating these characters, but clearly with research, curiosity is a huge element.
Yes, research can become addictive, actually. You get more and more curious as you go.
That's not a bad thing.
No, that's good.
What advice do you have? This is the advice question I have for you. For storytellers who choose to share and be able to express themselves in a comic book format, how do you create a compelling story within that format?
A big part of it is trusting your audience, not spelling everything out, not showing everything that you need to show. Let them figure some things out between the lines or between the panels, as the case may be. Also, let the art do some of the story. I've written things that I then take out of final drafts of manuscripts because we're showing something that I'm also saying, and you don't need to you don't need to duplicate. So if you have a choice between words and art in a picture book or a comic book, go with the art because there's lots of words. Let them work together in harmony.
It's another form of encapsulating, which of course we practice so much in school, how to summarize, how to really pick those salient points.
Yes.
All right, so any other biographies in the pipeline?
I do have some nonfiction in the pipeline. They're not strict biographies, I think you could say. They're true stories, and they're stories that you haven't heard yet, I'm sure. Not you, but most people. That's what I like to do. Superman and Batman, everyone's heard of, but no one knew the stories behind them. That's one of the appeals of doing these books. And then the books that I'm working on are in that category. So there's some high-profile angle. In one case, it's World War II. In another case, it's fairies. And then there's something in the background that is hidden or mysterious that I will talk about.
Okay, that covers a wide spectrum.
Those are pretty broad. I know. I know. I threw that at you. You weren't expecting that.
I have to ask you about this yellow finger that you have here next to you.
Well, this summer I had the honor of speaking at Comic-Con, which is in San Diego. It's the biggest comic book convention. It's the biggest pop culture convention in America. It happens every July. And I made these foam fingers to hand out there. I had 2 speaking gigs. The first one was just me. And at the end of my talk, which was very well attended and very well received, there's a lot of love for Bill Finger, I gave half of these out. I said, I want people to take these, and there's only one condition. You have to wear them. You have to wear them around the convention. So obviously I'm very transparent about it. It was publicity,
absolutely.
But it was not just publicity for my book, but for Bill Finger. And the next day I had my second talk, which was a panel, so there was another gentleman with me. And at one point during that talk, I announced that I was going to be giving out the second half of these fingers. And 2 people in the audience held up the one that I had given them the day before. I didn't know who they were, but they just held them up, and I took a picture of that. So they were men of their word. They were wearing their finger. They didn't know I was going to say that, and so they spread throughout Comic-Con.
They kept their deal. Well, it's an eye catcher, absolutely.
Yes, Bill Finger.
Good play on words. Thank you so much. But before we go, I cannot close the show without going back to Greenbriar East and thanking our students for their great questions. They did their reading, and I think they had some really good questions for you.
I agree. Thank you for your great questions and your compliments.
Thank you, everybody. And Mark, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure, too.
It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Well, if you would like to reach Marc Tyler Nobleman, visit his blog at Noblemania, the stories behind what I write. For more information about this program and future episodes of Meet the Author, visit our website. And to our new members in New South Wales, Australia, and Tegucigalpa, Honduras, see you on the web. For the Fairfax Network, I'm Della Kidd. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep dreaming.